Coordinates: 35 degrees 40 minutes 30.6 seconds north, 139 degrees 44 minutes 41.8 seconds east, 35.675167 degrees north, 139.744944 degrees east, 35.675167. 139.744944 Opposition. The House of Representatives is the lower house of the National Diet of Japan. The House of Councillors is the upper house. The composition of the House is established by Article 41 and Article 42 of the Constitution of Japan. The House of Representatives has 465 members, elected for a 4-year term. Of these, 176 members are elected from 11 multi-member constituencies by a party list system of proportional representation, and 289 are elected from single-member constituencies. 233 seats are required for a majority. The overall voting system used to elect the House of Representatives is a parallel system, a form of semi-proportional representation. Under a parallel system, the allocation of list seats does not take into account the outcome in the single-seat constituencies. Therefore, the overall allocation of seats in the House of Representatives is not proportional, to the advantage of larger parties. In contrast, in bodies such as the German Bundestag or the New Zealand Parliament, the election of single-seat members and party list members is linked, so that the overall result respects proportional representation fully or to some degree. The House of Representatives is the more powerful of the two houses, able to override vetoes on bills imposed by the House of Councillors with a 2/3 majority. The House of Representatives has several powers not given to the House of Councillors. If a bill is passed by the lower house but is voted down by the upper house, the House of Representatives can override the decision of the House of Councillors by a 2/3 vote in the affirmative. However, in the case of treaties, the budget, and the selection of the Prime Minister, the House of Councillors can only delay passage, but not block the legislation. As a result, the House of Representatives is considered the more powerful house. Members of the House of Representatives, who are elected to a maximum of 4 years, sit for a shorter term than members of the House of Councillors, who are elected to full 6-year terms. The lower house can also be dissolved by the Prime Minister, or the passage of a non-confidence motion, while the House of Councillors cannot be dissolved. Thus the House of Representatives is considered to be more sensitive to public opinion, and is termed the lower house. While the legislative term is nominally 4 years, early elections for the lower house are very common, and the median lifespan of post-war legislatures has in practice been around 3 years. For a list of majoritarian members and proportional members from Hokkaido, see the list of members of the Diet of Japan. Shaded note that the composition of the ruling coalition may change between lower house elections, e.g. after upper house elections. Parties who vote with the government in the Diet, but are not part of the cabinet, are not shaded. The Japanese Parliament, then known as the Imperial Diet, was established in 1890 as a result of the 1889 Meiji Constitution. It was modeled on the parliaments of several Western countries, particularly the German Empire and the United Kingdom, because of the Emperor Meiji's westernizing reforms. The Imperial Diet consisted of 2 chambers, the elected House of Representatives, which was the lower house, and the House of Peers, which was the upper house. This format was similar to the House of Lords in the Westminster system, or the Herrenhaus in Prussia, where the upper house represented the aristocracy. Both houses, and also the emperor, had to agree on legislation, and even at the height of party-based constitutional government, the House of Peers could simply vote down bills deemed too liberal by the Meiji oligarchy, such as the introduction of women's suffrage, increases in local autonomy, or trade union rights. The Prime Minister and his government served at the Emperor's pleasure, and could not be removed by the Imperial Diet. However, the right to vote on, and if necessary to block, legislation including the budget, gave the House of Representatives leverage to force the government into negotiations. After an early period of frequent confrontation and temporary alliances between the cabinet and political parties in the lower house, parts of the Meiji oligarchy more sympathetic to political parties around Ito Hirobumi and parts of the liberal parties eventually formed a more permanent alliance in the form of the Riken Seiukai in 1900. The confidence of the House of Representatives was never a formal requirement to govern. But between 1905 and 1918, only one cabinet took office that did not enjoy majority support in the House of Representatives. During the Taisho political crisis in 1913, a no-confidence vote against the third Katsura government, accompanied by major demonstrations outside the Diet, was followed shortly by resignation. Subsequently, in the period often referred to as Taisho,